One of the things I always try to do whenever I come and do an event is I always try to find, some sort of sports rivalry. I'm from Chicago, so there's, outside of like the 2013 Stanley Cup thing, which is still a little fresh. I mean, there's not much of Chicago versus Boston as it goes to sports. Maybe back in the early 80s, the Bulls Celtics, but I have to go back to like the one thing that I remember most, more than anything in the world. This, kind of dates me, but this is what I remember most, 46-10. Does anybody know the significance of that one? Super Bowl 20, 30 years ago today, almost 30 years ago to the day, letting Refrigerator Perry, score a touchdown on you. Great game for the Chicago Bears. I figure 30 years is enough time to actually bring it up and at least be able to say, hey, Chicago still had something at one point. Because, if anybody can relate to a Chicago Cubs fan, it's a Boston Red Sox fan, so. What was it? We got used to until you guys ruined it, yeah. So today what I want to come in here and talk about, I work for Red Hat. I run the virtualization business for Red Hat, looking at virtualization strategies, how we take all the technology from the past, present, future, and how we go forward with what we're trying to do to deliver overall a cloud offering and overall virtualization solution. So everything that I'm talking about is completely open source. Everything is freely available. I'm talking about all of the projects, upstream communities that we work with, that we participate in to deliver software for Red Hat. So I don't want to come in here and do a massive, shove Red Hat down your throat presentation. I do want to talk about the community element of what Red Hat does, how we contribute that upstream, and ultimately go into the various projects that you guys can look to start leveraging to modernize your data center. What are these open source technologies that people are using? So open source is software whose source code is available. You can take it, modify it, enhance it. Anybody can take this, modify it, and redistribute it at will. There's a couple different types of licenses, of course, but for the most part, it's all about sharing information, sharing code, and making things more available. You get a lot of control over that. A main argument that people will continue to fight on is I do personally feel that you get better security when something is open source. You get more eyes looking at it. You have more trust over what you're actually compiling and installing in your environment if you're actually looking at the source code. You don't have these hidden backdoors that network vendors have had in their code for 8 years that was potentially planted by the NSA. You see this stuff up front, in person, and can actually see exactly what you're putting into your environment. And from that standpoint, yes, there are always going to be vulnerabilities. Yes, there's always going to be something opened up for attack. With open source, it's closed incredibly quickly, and everybody has a chance to find it. It's not locked in and hidden by vendors or other individuals to not expose it. It's hard to hide when it's all in open source and plain view. Big thing is just freedom from vendor lock-in. You can take these bits, you can compile them yourself, you can build them yourself, you can customize them. You can do whatever you want with these things. And a lot of these technologies are built around integrating with both other open source projects and even in many cases, other proprietary software products. So you do have a lot of flexibility and ultimately a significant cost savings when you're looking at open source, which for the most part, the software itself is freely distributable. Red Hat does offer services to help you support, maintain, build a life cycle, and something that you can trust with security in your overall environment. So open source from my standpoint is the way of the future. We see that change even within the last 5 years, many people transitioning into more accepting of open source technologies in their data center. Even 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was, open source, that's a big scary word. Now it's actually being adopted and we see initiatives where people are trying to go all open in their data centers. So we see that as a huge opportunity, obviously, within Red Hat. So what I'm going to talk about today is what we're kind of looking at as the open infrastructure. You kind of take a look at where we are today with physical and virtual servers. Where do we need to go? How do we get to private cloud? How do we get to the public cloud? How do we do this in a way where we can continue to maintain aspects of our traditional environment that aren't going to go anywhere? OpenStack's not going to come in and rip out your VMware or your traditional virtualization environment. It's not what it's designed for. It's designed for the next generation of applications. Containers aren't going to spell the end of virtual machines. So how do we help you still maintain the aspects of your traditional infrastructure while helping you modernize your data center? So first and foremost, from a physical server standpoint, we have the Linux operating system. Linux and Windows are the two single most prevalent operating systems that you find in the data center today. we actually see the growth of Linux continuing to grow over time. From an enterprise virtualization standpoint, you need a scalable, secure hypervisor. You need management that's open and interoperable, really continue to help you reduce those capital expenses. As we start to move into private cloud, this is all about the automation, orchestration, and self-service management of the environment at a wide scale. Really helps you reduce those operating costs so you don't need to invest the administration time every single time you have a new request for workloads. You can let your application developers service themselves, and based on the applications that they're starting to build, there's a stronger need for them to be able to service themselves and not rely on IT. And when we start getting into the public cloud, if half of your infrastructure is on Amazon or Azure or an external technology, and half of it is built on internal technologies, how do you manage that as a single group? How do you maintain control of your environment if developers are going off over here doing one thing while trying to conform to corporate IT policies internally? So cloud management is becoming much more important in how you tie these elements of private cloud, public cloud, traditional virtualization, physical infrastructure, all of that together in what really is becoming a transition into the modern data center. Significant challenges with trying to monitor and manage that all from a single location. So when we take a look at it, the open infrastructure technologies that I'm talking about really break into kind of three groups is how I'm classifying it. You have your traditional, this is kind of your enterprise data center virtualization technologies. Been doing this for 12 years. My first install was VMware ESX 152. First time I did a vMotion on ESX 2, I still remember that day. This goes back quite a ways in what's become almost standard in a data center. We're starting to move now towards cloud, private, public cloud infrastructure. We hear OpenStack being a giant buzzword in the market. What is OpenStack? What does it mean? And now we're even starting to hear further things around, new modernization efforts like containers, lightweight container operating systems. Talked about Microsoft NanoServer in the previous presentation. We're seeing that next generation of technology coming in and how we reduce footprint, size, increase the scale, deploy applications where virtual machines can do it in minutes. Cloud instances, containers can deploy applications in seconds. So how do we get to that next step using the technologies that are available? So when we look at traditional infrastructure, these are the communities that Red Hat works with. We have our Fedora, which is our core base operating system. We use the KVM hypervisor, and for hypervisor management, centralized management, we use the Overt project. So the Linux operating system itself is really the fundamental component in tying all these modernization technologies together. Everything that I'm talking about today is based off of Linux as a core, Linux-based technologies, and the whole open source methodology that Linux really introduced into the market. The Linux operating system in the data center is actually the fastest growing operating system. So we are seeing a massive increase in Linux adoption, again, because of those reasons of cost, flexibility, security. We see Linux really growing in data centers where 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was still kind of in its own little corner. Like they turn the lights down low on the Linux administrators so people don't have to interact with them. But that's definitely changing. The multiple architecture support is another important angle. If you take a look at the different types of environments that you may have in your data center, we're seeing a strong demand for power. IBM is doing a big open power initiative on Power 8 hardware to introduce more technologies. Getting off of some of the, IBM sees, how do we get away from AIX? People are demanding Linux. We have power architecture. We have ARM architecture, which is coming up quickly, particularly in the mobile and telecom space. We have x64. We have System Z support in Linux. Any type of hardware architecture that you can think of. My phone, Android, has a Linux base to it. So we're seeing all of these technologies across these multiple architectures that can only really be serviced by what Linux is doing in the open source community, where anybody can take this and port these into these different architectures. And again, we want something that's stable and secure for your most critical workloads. So we're seeing, from our standpoint at Red Hat, a vast number of our workloads are large JBoss applications. We run one of the largest European airlines. The entire flight routing system, online ticket purchase, online check-in for this airline is all based on a JBoss application stack using the Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization technology running on top of a RHEL operating system. So that entire Linux stack using the Linux operating system with the KVM hypervisor and JBoss application suite really ties all of this together to provide something that's stable, secure, and can run mission-critical workloads, Oracle workloads, SAP workloads, the types of certifications that we're seeing it's actually pretty rare that we're seeing core SAP infrastructure being installed on anything but Linux nowadays. So a little bit of a technical detail, just trying to highlight when I say KVM hypervisor, what do I mean? The KVM hypervisor itself is broken into what I call 3 core components. There's a KVM kernel module. This is a module that sits inside of the Linux kernel that's responsible for helping translate calls from virtual hardware to physical hardware. And that's done through the QEMU emulator, which sits in the user space of Linux. This is what's interfaced with. The interface into that is the libvirt API. So you make calls into libvirt API into the QEMU emulator, which does hardware emulation, and using the KVM kernel module, QEMU is able to call through the VTX technologies from Intel, the similar technologies from AMD, direct calls into physical hardware to help optimize and what we feel is give the best performance from a virtual infrastructure standpoint. There are tons of tools that surround this. There's command line tools, there's graphical tools, and how you manage this. But the core of that is that kernel module, the emulator, and the API to actually effectively manage that. So that's what Red Hat considers the KVM hypervisor when we talk about it, when we deliver it, when we package it. And this is kind of highlighting how we overall look at it kind of through that chain of virtual hardware talking through the kernel module to physical hardware. Don't want to go into too much detail. I can, but if I do that for every single technology, I'll be here for about 8 hours, and you guys really don't want that. So when we take a look at how do we manage that, that's great. We have a hypervisor. It's like an ESXi instance. It's just kind of sitting there. How do we manage that? What is the open source vSphere? What is the open source System Center virtual machine manager? That is Overt. It's one of the projects that we contribute to. That's the centralized management of your KVM hypervisor. A lot of good features. It does the automated workload management. It has the high availability. It has the live migration capabilities. It has the ability to hot add resources to running virtual machines. It has probably 90 to 95% of the capability that customers in enterprise data centers legitimately care about when they're running a highly available enterprise data center. A lot of time and investment over the last 8 years going into the project to make sure that it can meet the needs of the most critical applications today. Has a built-in self-service user portal. Again, trying to make sure that the people that need to consume virtualization can do so on their own without having to bother administrative resources, timely processes, really working on automating and orchestrating as much of the process as we can. And what we're seeing is unmatched performance for this technology. There's an industry standard benchmark that hardware vendors like to use called SpecVirt that's released out there. 13 of the top 16 results of the SpecVirt performance measurements for the SpecVirt 2013 test, 13 of 16 are Red Hat KVM technologies. There's 2 by Huawei, who are also using their own KVM technologies, and 1 result by VMware. Hardware vendors come to Red Hat when they want to highlight the performance and the scalability of their hardware using a virtualization platform. So much so that other vendors have to go build out their own test kits, highlight their own hardware, and don't let anybody else, any other hypervisor, any other software, show results that are on par with their test kit. So again, with the spirit of Red Hat, we do everything out in the open. We use the open SpecVirt results, and we're highlighting that we have one of the best performing hypervisors in the market today, especially important when you're looking at your mission critical workloads. So where do we really see this Overt, or for Red Hat, it's the Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization product coming in. Key entry points that we really see are in dev test automation. Again, this cost versus return of existing technologies is pretty high. When you start taking a look at non-production, non-critical, you need to get up a test infrastructure. Do you want to pay the tax of an existing technology? Possibly not. We provide a very low-cost alternative, and we're seeing that when we get that into dev and test, that it's a great proving ground for us. Not only can we perform well, not only is it easy to manage, we can then take that, and as applications roll out, we can move them into production. We start getting into these mission-critical workloads. We are running, as Red Hat, one of the companies that does back-end financial transaction processing for the Italian Stock Exchange, running a cluster of servers that are 128 vCPUs, 2.5 terabytes of memory, running at 95% of bare metal performance. Huge cost savings and huge reliability using open source technologies, using Linux, using the KVM hypervisor, using the Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization product on top of their infrastructure. And one of the things that we really want to focus on is we know that a transition in IT is coming. We know that enterprise virtualization will continue to grow, but it's also going to lose market share. We will see things moving towards cloud instances. We will see things moving to containers. It doesn't spell doom and gloom for enterprise or traditional virtualization. Definitely not the case. But we also see that there's a future. And those futures aren't and shouldn't be tied to a traditional or legacy architecture and maintained on this side of the wall. We see the need for containers to be able to be very flexible, built into a scale-out platform, looking at OpenStack technologies and how we provision and meet this next generation. So how do we help our customers get from where they are today into this next generation? How can the open source community do that? How can we build in that transformation and help them manage that entire stack from a single centralized operational view, whether you're going to public cloud instances, private cloud instances, container technologies, still have elements of your traditional infrastructure. We need hybrid cloud management that helps us take a look at that. So that gets us into the cloud infrastructure conversation. We see new demands coming in from the business. The business challenges. We need faster time to market. We need to be more agile. We need to deliver services faster than our competitors, or we will lose market share and we will lose customers. We need to be elastic. We need to be scalable. When end of quarter processing comes along, or Christmas holiday season comes along and retail needs to massively scale out 10x their infrastructure, they need to be able to do that quickly, easily, efficiently. And have that flexibility as you're doing that, not to get locked into one single vendor or have to pay as you go to do that. From a developer side, we see this push coming down of aligned to these business challenges that we need to reduce the time to provision, develop, and deploy these applications. Business is pushing us really hard to deliver faster. We need the technologies to help us do that. We need to be able to test these new features, update applications faster, move to agile software development approaches. We need to improve the overall availability of the platform and resources while we're doing that. That causes a pretty big challenge for the traditional IT data center operations guys. The people that are responsible for running the data center are being pressured from the business. They're being pressured from the developers. Everyone's saying that they need to move faster. Take this thing, make it bigger, better, faster for me. So we need to increase their operational efficiency. We need to maximize the resource utilization of the infrastructure that they have. And we have to keep things reliable, secure, and compliant all at the same time. So major challenge, major pressure for the people that are responsible for running and managing the data center. So the two things that we talk about here, one is the OpenStack, which is the private and public cloud offering. They're kind of calling it an operating system. I don't know that I'd necessarily agree with that. But then also the ManageIQ, which is a hybrid cloud management solution that can sit on top of this complexity to help you standardize your operational procedures. Make sure that your admins or your consumers of your infrastructure have one place to go, regardless of where your technology sits. So from an OpenStack standpoint, it's a very modular architecture. It's designed to be easy to scale out and it's really based on a growing set of core services. So they kind of take this very siloed approach to their technologies. They have a compute service. They have several storage services. They have a networking service. They have an API service. They have all these things, an authentication service. All these things that are meant and built to scale out in massive succession. If I need more storage, I can quickly provision storage in a matter of seconds. If I need new workloads, I can spin up multiple instances almost immediately. On top of that, they do have infrastructure management. They have the ability to do monitoring, data processing, orchestration of these capabilities. All of this is kind of wrapped up into one stack that is called OpenStack. Help deliver an infrastructure that can scale and meet the needs when you need to provision in seconds and minutes are no longer efficient for what your application needs are. So OpenStack really is built for massive on-demand scale out and capacity. The long overheard analogy of pets versus cattle. Your virtual machines and your enterprise virtualization are your pets. You care about them, you feed them, you keep them with you for 14 years. OpenStack are your cattle. You grow them up to the point where you can slaughter them and eat them, make up some good steaks, and when you're done with them, you use what you can and get rid of it. Not necessarily a good analogy for the PETA folks, but I'm from Chicago, so I only know what red meat is. So, And it really helps kind of remove some of that vendor lock-in. There are tons of vendors that are incorporating into these standard APIs. Looking at overlay networking services, there are a ton of vendors that are out there that are building APIs and compatibility for overlay networking, doing VXLAN, doing all these capabilities that you need to do for a software-defined infrastructure, all built into the core of what OpenStack can provide, and you can choose your vendor, whether it's brain's fried, too much travel this week. Quite a few vendors that we work with, even at Red Hat, to help deliver networking capabilities. The Nuage Networks is one of them. Okay, there we go, I got one. Community development, it really drives high feature velocity. If you take a look at the release cycle of OpenStack, it's every 6 months there's a new major release that's made available. Every 6 months there's a major conference somewhere in the world. They talk about the new features. 6 months later the release comes out and they're talking about the next version. It's very high velocity, very fast pace. And while that's good from a feature function standpoint, you're getting the capabilities that you need. The telco industry is getting their NFV capabilities. They're helping drive where they need to be in the future. It also does have some challenges. How do you maintain stability at that scale for what could be critical parts of your infrastructure? And that's where Red Hat comes in to help provide the testing matrix, the support matrix, the compatibility, the partnership relationships, everything that you need to take OpenStack and take it to the next level and be able to trust it to run your core infrastructure. And really overall, it's all about the greater automation around the resource provisioning and scaling. Not having to send a ticket to the storage team, wait 4 weeks for them to come back and say, oh, here's your storage. Not waiting, days, weeks to get new networking VLANs set up and configured. All these capabilities are built around being able to scale at the pace that you need to for your business, not at the pace that IT traditionally moves in. So how do we manage all of that? I mean, that sounds big, complex, scary. So you have the ManageIQ product upstream. This comes down to CloudForms from Red Hat as the product that we deliver. It's built for managing that hybrid infrastructure. Help you transition those workloads. Help you understand when you're ready to provision a new workload, what's the right place for it? Is it in traditional virtualization? Is it in an Amazon EC2 cloud? Is it in your private OpenStack environment? Is it in your VMware environment? It helps you make those choices intelligently to help you deliver the right technology in the right place, regardless of what the destination is, and lets you view it as an entity operationally as a single standalone point of view. It really does help you enhance that private cloud from that standpoint. So how you manage all the service orchestration on the back end, which could span across multiple technology stacks. And that's the key value of what ManageIQ provides, is it doesn't matter where these workloads run. If it's on Azure, Amazon, Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, vSphere, Hyper-V, doesn't matter. It has a plug-in provider architecture. Wherever your workloads are running, it can plug it in, consume it, and give you visibility into your cloud. It can give you chargeback, lifecycle management, workflows to help orchestrate the cloud. Everything that you need to effectively manage a wide range, broad scale, hybrid infrastructure is built into what ManageIQ and ultimately CloudForms from Red Hat provides. And really helps you with some of that virtual lab automation. Helps you make sure that you have that control of development, the QA testing cycles built into place. The expiration of the VMs, saying I only need this for 3 weeks, make sure it gets killed. Send the email to the developer 5 days before just to make sure he has the option to extend it with management approval. All of that orchestration that you can build into the product to make sure that actually aligns to the policies of your organization, your IT, so you can help avoid some of that VM sprawl that still continues to happen now, not just in an enterprise virtualization space, but EC2 sprawl, which now costs you money if you leave EC2 instances out there running. You gotta have to make sure you stay on top of these things from a cost, performance, consumption perspective. So that gets us into what are we doing with modern infrastructure? What is the next step? Where are we going? Where is all this technology taking us? And this is the modernization efforts of the infrastructure. 2 key projects that we're looking at here, one being Docker and the whole container movement, and one being Atomic, which is a lightweight operating system, much like Microsoft NanoServer, that is a small, lightweight footprint, very locked down, very secure, that helps you run containers. Actually, probably a very similar story to what Microsoft just told you guys in the previous presentation. So looking at the container standpoint, it's a runtime and packaging format that allows you to bundle in a specific set of applications that sit on top of a Linux kernel base. So you can literally deploy, pull and deploy applications in seconds, doing 2 simple commands at a command line. Docker pull, Docker run, you have a whole application that's up and running. And it doesn't actually interfere or have a hard dependency on the underlying operating system platform that it's running on. It's separate from the operating system. You can run multiple containers. You can get incredible density when you're looking at running containers on bare metal. And overall, what you want is to gain that consistency in that dev, test, and production. So when you can pull from a centralized repository that has a trusted set of images, Red Hat has its registry that are tested, validated, certified. SCAP testing is done. Vendors sign off on and deliver into a registry. When you can pull from that and effectively deliver applications in seconds, including Oracle, SAP instances that are built and tested specifically for this next generation of scale, continues to help you from that development standpoint when you really need to turn up the volume on scale efficiency in the data center. And really you can deploy containers anywhere across the virtualization environment, your private cloud, your public cloud. Microsoft is adopting container technologies. So Azure, anywhere you want to put containers, we have the ability to provision and deploy them. Of course, containers need something around it to run. And the project that we have is Atomic Platform. Red Hat offers this as Red Hat Enterprise Application Suite. It's a container optimized minimal OS. So we took Red Hat Enterprise Linux, ripped out all the 1900 packages that most people don't need, and left it to just the core packages required to access the hardware, initialize the hardware, get a basic operating system up and running, and be able to run these container packages. Again, lower attack vector, smaller size, smaller footprint, easier to deploy, easier to manage, and stateless. If one dies, you spin up another one, you throw your container onto another host, and it runs just the same as it did previously. So it also contains that runtime and packaging format. This is in the Open Container Initiative. I believe OCI is the name of the actual format that's being used in the broader community to actually take these applications, whether they're your traditional applications, whether they're the next generation technologies for web development, puts them all into a group and makes it easy to deploy. There's actually orchestration and management capabilities that can help you manage if a host fails, what happens? Well, much like enterprise virtualization, there's high availability like services. There's the Kubernetes capabilities that Red Hat is working with Google very closely from an engineering effort in the upstream community. Orchestration, clustering, how these are provisioned, what happens when something fails. Kubernetes actually helps us make sure that we continue to run and manage all of this data. It also introduces the capability to do logging and metrics as these containers may move across pods and containers. Pods is the Kubernetes term for a cluster in traditional virtualization. Containers would be the equivalent of a virtual machine. So help us make sure that we can see, understand, and have visibility into the overall stack. And it's not, again, just done in isolation with, I have a Linux server that I can run a container on. It's I have a group of Linux servers that can run any number of applications across them. How do I effectively manage that? Much like the same challenges of if I have a single hypervisor, that's great, I can use it on my desktop. When I have to scale that to 1,000 hypervisors, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Host configuration management, making sure that everything is consistent and everything's in place that needs to run containers. If I'm not mapped to the same storage, if I'm not mapped to the same networking, I'm going to have problems with my containers. Same thing with enterprise virtualization. We're seeing a pattern here. It's a different technology, exact same challenges, exact same problems that have existed for years that we figured out. And we're starting to leverage the knowledge that we have in 10 to 12-year-old technologies and bringing it into the modern world. Multi-host networking, powered by Open vSwitch. Open vSwitch, another good open source project to keep your eye on. I don't explicitly talk about it here, but it really does provide pluggable architecture into your network stack that helps you take different modules or different plugins or different interfaces into network management and make sure that you have full control over that. There's also a couple things that are added into Open vSwitch. There's another project around that called Open Virtual Networking that's closely related that is actually trying to take the concept of L2, L3, L4 VXLAN technologies, and building in a virtualization software-defined networking stack across the overall solution. So being able to do mass deployment without actually having a physical network infrastructure outside of basic connectivity. Even within a single host, if I wanted to build out multi-VLAN architectures, I can put an L3 routing agent, multiple VLANs. You can do some really cool, really creative stuff with some of the technologies that are being built into the Linux kernel today. On top of that, even one step further down the networking path is Open Daylight, which is a full-blown software-defined networking management, complete top to bottom, do everything from your network using this technology. Definitely another key technology to watch, something to look out for as it matures. See what that translates into some of the downstream technologies that are offered by possibly Red Hat, possibly other vendors in the space. And it looks like I went through my presentation quite a bit quicker than I had originally thought. So normally it takes me about 60 minutes when I just focus on virtualization. When I do an overview, apparently I can get it done in 40 minutes. So one closing thought that I have is these modernization efforts, these cloud instances, these containers, they are not the end of traditional virtualization as we know it. You will still have a virtual infrastructure. I've heard way too many times that we have some new shiny objects over here. Customers come to me and say, hey, I want OpenStack to replace VMware, or I want OpenStack to be my new virtualization platform. It's not really what it was designed for. You can't just rip out VMware and put OpenStack into place. You can't just get rid of your VMs and turn everything into a container. You still have key infrastructure services, key things that will continue to need to run in your traditional virtualization data center. But you still want to be able to take advantage of these modernization technologies. Yes, cloud instances are valuable in the right use case. Yes, containers are absolutely valuable, again, when used the right way. Don't go and burn down your data center yet because of these new technologies coming in. It's actually, when we're looking at the numbers in the market, enterprise virtualization is actually still growing faster than cloud instances and container technologies. So the growth and investment that people have isn't going anywhere. But what you do need to do is be prepared for that transition. At some point these topics are going to come up. Why aren't we using OpenStack? Why aren't we using public cloud? Why aren't we using containers? You need to be able to think of that and deliver that in context with your traditional infrastructure, with your existing environment, and how you manage that collectively as a single whole, and not try to get stuck into this continuing to run everything in enterprise virtualization where it may not necessarily make sense. It may require moving to a different platform, into OpenStack, into Atomic Platform. How do you get there and how do you centrally manage that? And that's one of the things that Red Hat can help you provide. So Red Hat is a fairly sizable company. More than 90% of the Fortune 500 companies run Red Hat software, products and solutions that we have. We're now over 8,300 employees. This one's actually a little bit older. I think we're closer to 9,000 employees now, continuing to grow year over year. I believe we like to really brag about it every single quarterly earnings call that we have. For the past, I think, up to 40 quarters now, we have never had a quarter that was worse than the previous quarter. Continuing to do better every single quarter, all based off of free software. So somebody got a business model right, and we're sticking with that. 85 worldwide offices in 35 countries. We are listed in the S&P 500, unlisted as RHT under the New York Stock Exchange. So that's a picture of our Raleigh office where I just flew in from last night. And tons of award-winning solutions. If you take a look at, when someone says Linux, the first thing that people normally think about is Red Hat. We are the number one, most distributed, most purchased Linux operating system for paid Linux in the enterprise data center. So we have a lot of trust with customers. We've built that trust over a period of 15 years and continue to provide key solutions all the way dating back from 1999 all the way through to today. Helping customers through economic downturns, helping people reduce costs, increase performance. That's a core value proposition of what Red Hat provides. So if you do want more information, we will be at our booth after the dinner, all the way on the other side, of course. So you have to walk outside that freezing cold area to get there. But please, stop by, ask us questions. We probably have somebody that can talk deep into any one of those topic areas. Probably everybody thinks they can talk deep about every one of those areas. I think only one person may be able to, who's hiding over in the corner over there. But we have people here that can help you at a business level or a technical level understand everything that we're doing. So we've I think one of the first times that Red Hat's contributed to this event. I believe it's my third or fourth. I am disappointed that it's the winter one and not the summer one up in Freeport where I get my lobster. But hopefully, we'll have more opportunities to take advantage of that going forward in the future. So we do have some time for some basic questions here. I have another 20 minutes, so.
How do you license Atomic? How do you license Atomic?
Right now, we're actually analyzing, how we're looking at licensing Atomic. Right now, Atomic is licensed as just another Linux server, and we are looking at some things internally about how does Atomic actually just become a part of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So we realize that trying to take Atomic and build its own thing off of it, complicated, confusing for end users, so we are looking at how we can actually build that as just another part of the Red Hat Enterprise Linux operating system. Nothing final yet, but those are the directions that we're looking at and thinking, and again, listening to the customer base, looking at how we deliver the right solution to the right customer.
I've got customers who've been telling me for several years that they want to move to KVM.
Mm-hmm.
But the plans keep getting pushed out a little bit. What are you doing to try to help customers accelerate those plans?
Yeah, so we have another version of our Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization product coming out, 3.6. The GA date is March 9th, and my Senior Director of Engineering is hiding in the corner, and I'm holding him to that date. He's not even looking up at me either. So March 9th is the release date of our 3.6 product, and we're doing several things. One is we actually have integrated V2V migration utilities built into the 3.6 product. There has been a standalone project called Vert V2V that we've been nurturing and maintaining internally. Kind of a pain in the ass to use. Required a standalone desktop operating system, exporting that image into a storage domain, re-importing it into enterprise virtualization, kind of ugly. Now everything's integrated, streamlined. You can connect to a vSphere instance, select which VMs you want to migrate, and automates the entire process, puts it into the proper clusters. At the same time, we know that that's not an overnight process. Any customer of scale that's running more than 20 virtual machines will take months, if not years, to complete a sizable migration. And that's where the benefit of CloudForms comes in. The ManageIQ product is while you're doing a migration, while you're doing a transition, you want to standardize your operations. You don't want to have to stop and say, this is running over here, so I have a set of processes, but this is running over here, so I need a different set of processes. And that's where the CloudForms position comes in helping you standardize your operational management. And regardless of if you need to provision to VMware, to Hyper-V, to Rev, it doesn't matter. Your consumers go to one place, and as you're migrating workloads, whether it's to Azure, to Amazon, to Rev, to somewhere else, we have the capability to help you do that and manage that with minimal impact to the actual business consumers that rely on the infrastructure.
These are actual locations with thousands of locations instead of small offices.
Yes.
Do that?
Yes. A lot of different types of industries, retail, insurance, legal, large legal law firms. So a lot of type of remote office, back office type of instances. That's absolutely one of the key, top of mind things that people are looking at. It's not just about giant data centers in one location, but it's tons of small data centers moved across multiple locations. Come to the booth. We'll talk to you. Okay. If you guys do have any further questions, I don't want to hold you up from lunch, so please enjoy the lunch, enjoy the rest of the event, and enjoy all of the vendors that are here to talk to you about, well, that's after you walk away from the booth, like, wow, I'll get a hold of that guy. No, we're here to talk to you about all the solutions that we offer. It's a giant ecosystem. Plenty of fun to go around for everybody, so make sure you take advantage of the opportunity here today. Thanks a lot, everybody.